All right, I think I got everything working here, and I got audio, which is always a good thing. Hi, everybody. It's Joe Cioffi here on this Monday, on a very busy Monday. We've got a lot of weather going on across the eastern part of the United States. I know Raymond is jumping up and down because he's in a slight risk of severe weather and for Tuesday. And it is unusual but not unheard of to have severe weather this time of year. Remember, you've got two things happening. You've got this very big ridge in the eastern part of the United States that's been here for the last week or so, breaking down in a big way. And you've got this deep trough that's dropping down into the eastern part of the United States and also doing it in a big way. So it isn't a surprise that we're seeing some violence in the atmosphere in the form of severe weather today across the western Carolinas and on up into the panhandle of Virginia. And gradually that's going to be lifting up to the northeast. So I'm going to get the weather video part underway, and then we'll come back, and in the meantime I'll talk to you guys, and we'll talk some more as soon as we get the weather situation all front and center. So stand by. Amazing. All it really takes is for the weather pattern to start to change and a ridge breaking down in the eastern states, and we suddenly went from an absolutely calm satellite view to what we have this evening across much of the eastern part of the United States, or at least most places east of the Mississippi River. This is sort of the classic look of a strong upper air system, and whenever you see that comma shape in the atmosphere, whenever you see a signature on the satellite and on the radar that's shaped like a comma, that's telling you that you've got this, very, very strong system in the high layers of the atmosphere, and we are dealing with a weather front and some very, very warm tropical air that's coming in from the southeast. So that's sort of feeding into all this, and as a result, we've seen a severe weather outbreak today across much of western South Carolina, western North Carolina, up into the panhandle of Virginia, and even into southern West Virginia with some heavy downpours and even some tornadic activity. And this is all destined to move for the northeast as we go through the next 24 hours. But one of the things you want to look at in terms of the upper air, when you've got an upper air jet stream pattern where we have basically a negative, what we call the negatively tilted trough, okay? In other words, the axis of that trough is running from the northwest to the southeast. It means that the weather front that's associated with this is going to be very, very slow moving, because the winds along the east coast are basically going to be coming up from the south. So the weather front is going to have a difficult time making eastward progress until this thing kind of lifts up and around. So it may take all of Tuesday and part of Wednesday to get this front to completely clear the coastline. It's just it's the way it works when you have a trough like this versus, for example, if the trough were more like this, okay, where the upper flow is pushing everything along. This is where you get these weather fronts that just kind of move on through. But again, it's that negatively tilt. This is a positively tilted trough, northeast to southwest. This is progression. Weather systems progress west to east. The other way, they lift up from south to north. And then that's the dilemma here with regards to the forecast. Now, here's the radar for this evening, and you can see there's some strong thunderstorms. Quite an impressive little line here moving across western South Carolina into parts of North Carolina. That's the view from the southeast part of the U.S. When we look into the northeast, the showers, some heavier showers that are running up through West Virginia and parts of western Pennsylvania, again, not making a whole lot of eastward progress here. I'll go south, and they're out of the Gulf states. Let's see if we can run it by into the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes. And you can see here, you've got actually a fairly strong concentration of rain up in through Michigan and Indiana. And then you start to get into that frontal boundary with the cold front. And of course, you see that signature again, that comma shape, always telling you that there is power here in the atmosphere. Meanwhile, out in the west, things are pretty quiet for the most part, but they're hot in California. Not a whole lot of moisture to deal with here. A lot of moisture running up into southwestern Canada as this big upper high is building out in the western part of the United States to correspond with that deep trough in the east. But one of the things I want to show you here, the temperatures in Southern California near the coast, very hot today. 108 near Los Angeles. Looking at Thousand Oaks, 102. Of course, this air is extremely dry. I'm not sure what station this is, but it looks near the Angeles National Forest, 99. Oxnard, 105 with a 25-mile-an-hour wind from the northeast gusting to 29. So all these areas that are downsloped from the mountains are in the 90s to over 100. You move up the coast, you're looking at temperatures also in the mid to upper 90s to 100 near Santa Maria. San Luis Obispo is 104. And up around San Francisco, look at these temperatures near the coast, 90 degrees in and around the Bay Area. That's just, I'm sorry, this is Salinas and Santa Cruz. You go up to San Francisco, near the coast, it's in the 70s and 80s. It's still pretty warm. You go just inland, it's in the upper 80s to around 90. Got my geography there confused for just a moment. So let's look at what we can expect to happen now going forward as this system in the east starts to lift up. The Storm Prediction Center has much of eastern New York down into northern Delaware, eastern Pennsylvania, from there eastward into western New England, a narrow band of slight risk of severe for Tuesday. There's the front, and you'll notice that as we go through the day Tuesday, the area takes a long time to move eastward. It still kind of hangs around into tomorrow evening. And by the way, with a strengthening low near Sault Ste. Marie in Michigan, there will be some snows on the western side and parts of the UP of Michigan and northeastern Wisconsin with this, although I don't know how much it will amount to. Looks like it'll probably mix with rain. And even Wednesday morning, that front is still lingering along the coast. So New England down to much of Long Island still might be has some heavy rain on Wednesday. Meanwhile, in the west, really not too much happening. Now, here comes the next low that drops into Minnesota and Wisconsin, and with that, we may see some significant snows for this time of year anyway, up in northern Minnesota and eventually working its way into northwestern Wisconsin with this low. And then as it translates northward, you get this weather front. This is for the end of the week. Now we're at Saturday. There's going to be another weather front setting up right here. And by the way, we do have a tropical system that the model shows coming out of the Northwest Caribbean. The European is on the same page with all this. We'll show you now going forward. This front gets enhanced with some moisture, and there's a cold shot behind it. So even the GFS is actually indicating maybe a rain and snow mix for parts of central Pennsylvania, I guess in the elevated areas, and maybe into western New York, some places seeing their first flakes. Now, the tropical system never gets involved with this front. A separate low, surface low, forms here and lifts up, and that brings in a shot of very cool air into the first part of next week. Notice a big high coming down into the Dakotas and Minnesota, and eventually dropping down into Texas. So that pushes another shot of cool air and a cold front as we move toward the end of next week and the first days of the month of November. The upper air pattern, and this is the GFS run from earlier today. We still, of course, see this idea, and I'll start it from the beginning. You know, that ridge in the east breaking down, and here's that first deep trough that lifts up. And as soon as it's done lifting up, the next trough drops right in for this coming weekend. It's a pretty strong upper air trough here, so I wonder if the model might not be underdoing some of that moisture along the east coast. The European would argue that that is the case. So this is the GFS from today. Here's the European, which has a deep trough, but it has it further to the west than the GFS. And that's important because that may give more room for tropical moisture from the Northwest Caribbean and some kind of surface low perhaps to get involved and ride up the east coast for later Sunday night into Monday, enhancing the rain. So that's something we're going to be paying attention to see how the models handle all this. Here's the new GFS, which seems to be more in line with the European. Here's the European from earlier. You see the trough is further west. On the new GFS, now the trough is also further west. You've got a ridge that's out in the Atlantic. Got this low. One of the keys in these blocking patterns, you have to look for cutoff lows in the Atlantic, and you've got this thing out at 40 and 40 that's cut off from the main westerlies. So you basically have higher pressures building up in the North Atlantic in this region, and you've got your ridge out in the west with higher than normal pressures in the west, although there are a couple of disturbances that are popping up here and there. But the bottom line is this, this deep trough that the models are focusing on in terms of the long range. I'm going to jump back to the European model here, and you can see that the trough goes negative and lifts up and around. Now, here's where it gets a little dicey as we get further along into the first part of November. The European suddenly, on this run, it hasn't done this, and I suspect that we're going to see hiccups like this on certain runs. The European wants to bring that ridge back into the east, and at least temporarily brings a troughing more in the west toward the end of the 10-day period. GFS doesn't really go to this route on the old run. If we look at it from that standpoint, and I'll go back one run, the GFS, once it lifts out that trough, it actually drops another one right behind it. Now, that's where the big question is. Is the GFS correct in dropping a third trough into the east, or is the European going to be correct in having it more to the west? That will be one of the longer-term puzzles. It's a very volatile pattern that we have, and you're going to have to expect that there are going to be swings in both directions as we move ahead into the long term. So we'll stop it at this point, and I will take your questions. Here's that one last look at the western satellite. Actually, there is one more thing I want to do. We'll leave you with the tropics. The Hurricane Center acknowledging disturbed weather in the Northwest Caribbean and the possibility, giving us a 40% chance of development over the next 5 days. And some of the models are bullish in developing some kind of system out of here, but whether it's a broad low or something that may be a bit more tropical in nature, we'll have to just wait and see. But conditions may become certainly become more conducive, I think, later on this week. So in the meantime, we're going to be watching the system in the east and the severe weather that will occur this evening across the Carolinas and parts of western Virginia, and then the threat for severe weather for eastern Pennsylvania to western New England, including areas down from eastern Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, western Long Island, and westernmost Connecticut for Tuesday. Okay, I'm back. So you can see with everything that's going on just how complex the overall pattern is, and just how all that amplitude that we're seeing, these very, very strong ridges both off the East Coast now and out in the Atlantic, building up toward Greenland. You've got big ridge out in the west and that deep trough in the middle. So anytime that you have big changes in the atmosphere like what we're seeing, it's going to react in a violent way. I know a few of you have been asking about with respect to the tropical system in the Northwest Caribbean. One of the problems this time of year now is that you do have the influence of the jet stream extending pretty far to the south. And if you saw the structure of that trough, it runs almost from the North Pole all the way down to 20 degrees north. There's going to be probably a lot of wind shear going on. So you might have a low develop, but it may look more like a non-tropical system than anything else. It might not have time to become tropical, and then it's going to be moving up to the northeast fairly quickly. One of the things that the European suggests is that the low with the trough axis further west may be tucked in closer to the coast or even just inland. So I still want to open up to the possibility that we could get some heavy rain, another shot of heavy rain on Sunday up and down the East Coast, Saturday into Sunday. More Sunday for the Northeast, though, than Saturday will probably be the better of the 2 weekend days. With respect to snow, I got to remember now, I got to get used to showing these snow maps. You know, the latest GFS run, just to give you an idea, which I can't really pull up because I didn't set it up, does show, you know, maybe the first snows in some of those snow belts in western New York and northwestern Pennsylvania and northern New England, but it's going to be elevation driven, and even down in the mountains of West Virginia and western North Carolina, some snows being indicated. Up in northern Wisconsin, the upper peninsula of Michigan, northeastern Minnesota, there's where we start to see some, you know, 6-inch plus amounts being shown, but even some scattered snows as far south as northern Iowa and into the lower peninsula of Michigan as well. So this is just kind of looking like a typical late October setup for snow. And just remember that just 4 weeks from now, the atmosphere is so much colder than it is at this point. So what we're, you know, basically experiencing here is just a reversion back to average for this time of year, or maybe even in some instances it's going to be, certainly I think early next week behind that second trough, it's going to be below average in temperatures in a good chunk of the eastern part of the United States. Anthony Orr just joined us, and you know, he gave me a stat today that with respect to Typhoon Lan, you know, we were talking about yesterday how that is really the catalyst in all this change that's going on. The gales from that extended out almost 1,200 miles, which is the second largest measured, only eclipsed by Typhoon Tip, which I believe was way back before many of you, the times of many of you, and almost back before, not quite back before my time. It was in my time. I just can't remember the year off the top of my head. But you know, that it was quite large in terms of the size of the gales. And you know, look for, if this pattern holds as we get into the first couple of weeks of November, you're going to start to see, Typhoon Tip was in 79. Thank you, Delvin. I was just 20 years old then. But if this pattern holds into the first couple of weeks of November, you're going to start to see the lake effect snows become more prevalent and lake effect events become more active if we've got this trough in the eastern part of the United States. You saw what the Europeans suggest, that the ridge tries to pop back at the very end of the period, but again, I wouldn't hold my breath on that model being correct in that with all that's going on. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that, you know, when you have a pattern like this, there's a lot of volatility in these model runs, and you know, it throws these hiccups every once in a while. If we can maintain the ridging off the west coast and the ridging in the Atlantic up to Greenland and kind of hold a vortex in place over Hudson's Bay, that would certainly argue for another deep trough to drop in as we move into the first part of November. So I'm going to have to cut it short here, folks, as it's almost showtime for me. Check out, of course, latest web posts on meteorologistjoecioffi.com and also Angry Ben on nycweathernow.com and Long Island Weather on weatherlongisland.com. Those are my three websites. And of course, you can find me on Facebook at Meteorologist Joe Cioffi. And if you're new to my YouTube channel, I haven't said this in a while, thank you for being here. Thank you for all of you for being here. And if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, yeah, just hit the subscribe button, and you get notifications whenever I do new, videos, which is usually once a day. And in storm situations, it might be twice or even 3 times a day. All right, and it's free, which is the most important thing of all. And thanks for those of you who've hit super chat along the way. I really appreciate the hat tip and the chance for me to run out and get a cup of coffee and a cigar. And for those of you who've occasionally hit my PayPal, I appreciate that as well. Have a great evening, folks. We'll see you tomorrow.